August 9th, 1993, a group of Ukrainian kayakers were out on an adventure in Siberia. As they make their way down the winding river, they reach a section passing the Khamar Daban mountain range. As they hit a calm part in the river, one of the members of the team looks up and scans left. Just taking in the beauty of the snow-capped mountain, he spots something on the shoreline. It's not making sense what he's seeing, but he is shocked and bewildered. He rubs his eyes and takes another look. As the shape comes into form again, there's a young woman standing there, blank and expressionless, hair matted with dark red blood that once streamed down her face, now dry and crusty. The blood just seemed to cover her completely as she just stared out into nothingness. She didn't even seem to notice the kayakers there at all. It was something truly out of an 80s horror flick. As he seen this, he recoiled back, but caught himself short of just telling the others they should just get out there, run. But quickly he realized they couldn't just abandon this girl. They must help her. They need to get her help right now. They ended up getting the girl down the river to the nearest police department. But the whole way there, she didn't talk and remained expressionless, almost blank, like there was nothing inside. It was hard to get her to open up and talk about what had just happened to her.
They just dropped dead in front of me, you know?
But when she eventually did, she would tell them her name was Valentina Yutachenko, and the story she would tell would horrify and dumbfound the police and experts to no reprieve. Here's that story now. In the summer of 1993, a group of 7 hikers were planning an expedition into the Khamar Daban mountain range. It would be challenging, but the area was not uncharted territory. In fact, parts of the range were popular with tourists, as long as they visited at the right time of year. Leading the expedition was Lyudmila Kornikova, a 41-year-old survivalist, an experienced mountaineering guide. Her students adored her and felt safe with her, but Lyudmila had a reputation for pushing her students on these hiking trails and distances she chose, but she was not reckless. Everyone expected the summer's expedition to be simply another exciting but safe hiking adventure. She was a stickler for preparedness, and the expedition was thoroughly mapped out. Nothing had been left for chance. The hikers set off on August 2nd, 1993. With Lyudmila were 6 of her students, ranging from 24 to just 15 years old. Tatiana, 24, Alexander, also known as Sasha, 23, who had this mother-son relationship with Lyudmila, even though she wasn't his real mother, and was considered to be the most fit and competent on the mountain. Next was Denis, or Dennis, 19, Valentina, or Valia, 17, Victoria, 16, and Tamar, 15. The group was only one of 3 hiking parties in the region at the same time. Another was led by Lyudmila's daughter, Natalia, and was expected to meet Lyudmila's party 3 days later on August 5th. The plan was to take the train to Marino. Then from there they would hike up to the Khamar Daban ridge, and once they reached the summit, they would have shelter, firewood, and then the next morning they would make their descent about halfway down the mountain to meet up with Lyudmila's daughter, and then finish up the rest of the journey with their group. They had checked the weather forecast and it was very favorable and was supposed to be mostly clear the whole way there. But as it turns out, that would not hold true. As the group was trying to make their summit, just above the tree line, the weather took a nasty turn, and it started with this very cold rain that turned into sleeting, which turned into a heavy snowfall. And this would persist over the next couple of days. But never discouraged, Lyudmila chose to truck on, even using this as a teachable moment in perseverance. She would tell the group,
Anything can happen on the mountain. You must form a plan and push on. You must be positive and not make yourself a victim.
And the group, fully inspired, decided to do just that, and they moved on. On the 3rd day of hiking, August 4th, they found themselves about 30 minutes away from the summit, on a very open part of the mountain. No shelter, no trees, just a wide open expanse, freezing howling winds, and slushy rain with snow beating right down on them. I don't know if you've ever tried to climb up a hill in deep snow, but it can be brutal. Every step can be a fight. Trying to get your feet high enough just to get out of the snow, just to land right back into it and sink further down. And you do this over and over and over again, just to move inches each time. Ludmila's students were used to just drudging on without a break. It was just the way she operated. So when Ludmila had turned to the other hikers and said, "We are taking a break," they were all kind of caught off guard. But when she turned to them and said not only was they taking a break, but they were going to make camp here, they were stunned. There is a lot of controversies over why Ludmila would pick this spot, and we don't know the exact reason why. But probably fearing the safety of the group, if they kept on pushing, she chose to set up camp on the mountainside. We know they got their tent set up, and they were able to get a small bite to eat, but they was not able to get a fire started, and was left to bundle in the tent together for any little bit of warmth they could get. All night long, huddled in this tent, they would fight the storm. It would break a line on the tent, and they would have to rush outside in the howling wind and the sloppy snow and try to get it tied down and fix it. But sometime after 2 a.m., the lines broke again, and the wind would lift up the edge of the tent in a way that would send water rushing into the tent, soaking them in their sleeping bags. It made the rest of the night miserable, but they got the tents tied down, and they continued to huddle together, and they made it through. In the morning, Ludmila would wake up and look outside, and everything was covered in one big sheet of ice and snow. At this point, the weather is at its worst, and it's freezing cold. All of their stuff is wet. Ludmila is probably worrying about hypothermia and the safety of the group. So she wakes everyone up and tells them,
"Everyone up. We need to get down to the tree line. There's shelter there."
The group would get up and gather their things and start down the hill in a single file line. Roughly about 100 feet into the descent, when the rear member in the line, who was Sasha, the 24-year-old that Ludmila looked at like a son, cries out in horrible agony, then falls to his knees. They run over to help him, and as he makes it to his feet, he takes a step and falls again. Ludmila is the first to reach him, and as he looks up at her and the group, his eyes are wide with terror, and his mouth gaped wide open when all of a sudden blood started streaming from his eyes, then his nose, then his ears, then his mouth. As soon as this happened, Sasha would go silent and drop to the ground. Ludmila would drop with him and hold Sasha in her arms and check his pulse, and he was dead. Ludmila cried out, holding on to Sasha, while the rest of the group looked around at each other in disbelief. They could not believe this was happening, or even how it happened. They just couldn't wrap their heads around it. The most healthy and physically fit out of them now laid bloody and dead before them, with no apparent cause. Ludmila, still holding Sasha, told the others to go on down toward the trees and seek cover and build a fire.
"Down to the trees! Now!"
But the others just flat out refused. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay with her. But she would say it again, more forceful and matter of fact. While they didn't like that idea, they understood it and listened. So the group, minus Ludmila and Sasha, would start their march down the mountainside again, single file. But they couldn't help wonder what had happened and would it happen to them. They wouldn't make it far, maybe 10 to 15 paces, when they heard Ludmila cry out once again, beckoning them to come back and yelling, "Get here now." Valentina would be in the front row now, pushing to make it back to her, when Ludmila would shout out in pain, and blood coming from her eyes and nose as she started convulsing. With one final thrust, she heaved forward and slumped over, appearing to be dead. Now the group is truly horrified, not knowing what's happening or who could be next. Valentina, knowing that the forest below is still the safest bed because it provided a chance for warmth and distance from whatever was happening, turns around to tell the group, "Let's go." But she is stopped in her tracks. The rest of the group is bleeding from their eyes and ears, and some are even frothing at the mouth. Valentina, shaken, started checking herself, checking her mouth, her eyes, and she was relieved that she wasn't. But that relief was short-lived when she would look to her left and see 16-year-old Victoria and 24-year-old Tatiana as they just heaved forward and fell to the ground and started rolling around on their backs, ripping off their clothes and digging at their skin and frothing at their mouth. Valentina, shaken, would reach down and try to help Victoria, but when she did, Victoria would lunge at her like a rabid dog and bite her on the hand. Valentina would jerk her hand back in recoil, while Victoria curled into a ball and then went limp as she drew her last breath. Valentina, still in shock, starts to hear a thumping sound coming from her right side. and as she pans to see what it is, he notices Tatiana banging her head over and over again on a rock that is jutting out of the ground. After several hard thumps, Tatiana slams her head forward one final time and goes limp. At this point, Valentina is looking to get herself and the two remaining group members, Denis and Tamar, to safety. And so she scans to find them. She sees Denis run around behind an outcropped rock, looking scared but unaffected by whatever was taking out the rest of the group. Valentina runs over to him to check on him. On her way there, she sees Tamar fold over and slump to the ground, motionless. She assumes he is now dead too. When she makes it to Denis, she can see that he is also now bleeding from his eyes. But unlike the others, he was able to talk to her. Denis tells her to grab only essentials of what you need to survive. Ditch everything else. Make your way below the tree line, and I'll join you. She runs to her bag, grabs everything she needs, then turns to go down the mountain into the trees. As she does, she sees Denis slumped over his bag, motionless, and blood pouring from him, pooling into a puddle into the snow. She knew then that he was dead, and she was now all alone. She makes it down to the forest and finds a little bit of shelter, and gets into her sleeping bag, and waits her turn to die like the rest. But night would eventually come, and she would show no signs of what happened to her friends. Once it got completely dark, the storm would pick up dramatically, with high winds pushing through and whipping the trees around. Valentina would clutch her sleeping bag tight as she would hear the trees cracking and breaking as they crashed to the ground around her, smashing everything in its path, over and over again. She had made it through whatever took her friends out, but now she feared she'd be taken out by a falling tree, and this would go on all night long. At daybreak, the storm would clear, and Valentina started thinking about the group. Her friends were just lying on the mountain up there. Could any of them have survived? She asked herself. She'd have to be certain. She would make her way back up to the mountain, knowing it was probably a lost cause. She justified it by saying, even if none of them had made it, I could use any supplies I could get. When she made it back to where her group had perished, she noticed all of them still in the same spot, still motionless, and obviously deceased. So she goes by them one by one and closes their eyes and says her goodbyes so she would turn and aimlessly dredge right back into the forest, where she stayed for the next 4 days by herself in the Siberian wilds, walking around, desperately trying to find a way out, or at least hoping she'd be saved, but ultimately wondering if she was going to die soon. On the 4th day, alone, she starts to hear voices and would make her way to the river. This is the spot where she'd be seen by the kayakers and rescued. It would take a month for the authorities to find the rest of the group on that mountainside, but when they did, they couldn't believe what they saw. The bodies were twisted up and the faces locked in this painful grimace of absolute horror, and also, they all were missing their eyeballs. The autopsy could not tell the reason for their death, but said hypothermia probably played a role, and noted that their lungs looked bruised. Nothing in the autopsy would give a reason for what Valentina told them happened. A sudden, bloody and horrible, painful death of 6 healthy people in their primes, but did not even touch Valentina. To this day, a satisfactory explanation has never been given for the Khamar Daban mountain range incident. And just like the Dyatlov Pass incident in 1959, we may never be able to fully explain what happened. But that's a story for another time. If you like this story, hit the like and subscribe button if you'd like more content like this, and tell me in the comments what you think happened.